Hello and welcome to Dig It. I'm Peter Brown and hosting the show with me today is Chris Day. Hi Chris.
Hi Peter. Today on Dig It we welcome Nick Hamilton, son of Geoff Hamilton, who for 17 years presented BBC gardening programme Gardener's World. Nick continues with the legacy at Barnsdale in Rutland, where back in the 1980s over 30 TV gardens were created. The story of Nick, Barnsdale and the recollections of Geoff Hamilton have been beautifully collated in a new book, The Right Genes by Nick Hamilton. First, Nick, welcome to Dig It. It's great to be chatting with you, and I suspect we know where you are today.
You know where I am because I'm here every day, Chris, and happy to be here. I honestly couldn't think of anywhere better in the world to be.
I should imagine if you're lucky like us, we got the sun shining down here in Buckinghamshire at the moment, and it's not too windy today, so it's probably a perfect day to be out and looking around the gardens, isn't it?
I can tell you what, Peter, I mean, for the amount of council tax we pay, we deserve the sun here, and we pay enough for it. And it is, you're right, it's a gorgeous day outside, and I'm sat in my cupboard, as I do all too much these days, I'm afraid. I do get out and about as much as I can, but my office is in the cupboard, which is probably the best place for me, to be fair. And yeah, it's lovely, and it's a perfect day for looking out. And I mean, the gardens are just, as they are all over the country, just bursting forth, and it's such an exciting time of year.
Without a doubt, yeah, because spring's been quite late here this year for us in Buckinghamshire. Has it been the same up there in Leicestershire? Well, no, Leicestershire or Rutland? Is it Rutland?
Well, oh dear, don't come to Rutland and say Leicestershire. Oh dear.
Sorry.
you might not escape.
Oh,
We're very proudly backers Rutland, and smallest county in the country. So we're very proud of that. So that's where we are. And to be fair, it's, you know, the thing I think with both sort of areas is that we're far enough away from the sea coast to not be affected by sea breezes and things like that. So, you know, we get quite a concentrated cold when it gets cold. So we had a really, you know, for the winters that we're getting these days, quite a hard winter, and it has been a slow pick up from there, and the temperatures have been running sort of, you know, maybe somewhere between 1 and 3 degrees behind the average, and so things are later. But surprisingly, you say that, you look at some things, you think, oh my God, you know, you're doing what you should be doing at the right time, yet other things. So it gives this is the point, is that every year, I've said to people quite often that, you know, if you kept a diary of your own garden and you know, here, it's impossible for us to do, but of everything that is in flower on every single day of the year, every single year would be different.
You're not wrong.
Because of that variation you get with the weather. So the thing is that we know when there's, even without taking note of mentally or physically of what the weather's been doing every day, we know when things are different, because all of a sudden people will be asking about a plant that's a great complement to another plant, but that other plant outshines it all the time. And although they work well together, it's always the other plant that people see. And then all of a sudden you get one year when that plant is late doing what it's doing, and then all of a sudden this poor little plant that's been overshadowed for years and years and years suddenly is the main attraction, and people suddenly want that, whereas every other year they always want its partner. You know, so it's a strange thing how things like that can happen, where some plants can just randomly do what they always do, whereas others are actually affected by the weather.
I think that you're quite right. Nature and gardening can be very fickle at times, can't it?
Well, yeah. I mean, to be fair, you know, we are curators of our own spot, and that's what we are. But we do curate, and nature controls whatever we think. You know, we're not in control, really.
That's right. That's true. Nick, maybe we can start our chat about your dad, Geoff Hamilton, reading the book, which I did. It's a great read, by the way. He really was driven by his family, wasn't he?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, his family initially defined him. He was, you know, he had, I think when you read through the book, you do realise, and I do make, I think, quite a good effort of making the reader understand what my grandmother was like, so what my dad's mum was like, because he did have streaks of that within him, but he was very much, as I am, you know, his father's son. and so that defined him. But also, when he got his own family, then that was the main focus of his attention. Although horticulture is a life choice. It's not a job. It's a life choice. And so for me, horticulture has been my life really, even growing up. Even though when I was very a small child and up to teenage years, really, my dad was a self-employed landscaper. So I never experienced horticulture as a job in that respect, because you don't take young children on a site with you, when you're working in private gardens and things. But it's always been part of my life, and my dad as well, and he was very very keen on the family life. It was a big part of his life as well.
Excellent. And just thinking, I've grown up in a sort of family that's always been in horticulture as well. Did your father or did your mother sort of grow seeds and show you how to propagate and things like that when you were younger?
My dad was, I mean, we did, we did all that if we showed interest. And my dad was never one, to say, I'm in horticulture, you must follow what I'm doing. I've got two brothers, one older and one younger, and my older brother is a professional photographer, so took all the pictures for my dad's books and articles that he wrote, and still does for me, and has gone into website building and all that sort of stuff as well now. But he only lives down the road, and so he looks after all our website and web shop, and comes and takes photographs all the time here. But has had, in all that time of being in horticulture as a photographer, but in horticulture, has had no interest in gardening at all until he turned 60. And almost the day he turned 60 2 years ago, he suddenly got the passion, as people do, And I always say people come to it when they're ready. But he spent, people are surprised by that. My younger brother, who's a teacher, he still mows the grass under duress. He has no interest in gardening at all. I once taught him as a child. I once taught him the name Ficus benjamina, as we all know, is a fig, an indoor fig that people grow, mini rubber plant, as it were, and that's the only name that he's ever remembered. So every plant to him is Ficus benjamina, whatever it is, and he still remembers it to this day. But the thing is that the people are surprised when you say to them that that's the case. But then when you think about it, how many children do follow exactly the job that their parents
exactly
do?
that.
It is a rare thing, and I think that if you're born on a nursery, or you're born with a garden centre and you're living on site and it's all part of your everyday life like that, then you're more likely to go into it. But as I said, we weren't. But for me, it was from day one. So, but my dad never said, you must go into horticulture. So it was always a case of if we showed interest in something, then he would encourage. And I've always from a small boy, been sowing seed and growing things in the garden, had my own little veg patch and all of that sort of stuff, and the encouragement was there, from both parents in that respect.
Wonderful.
So, Nick, before the gardener's world, I put the term gig, which obviously it was amazing. How was life for the Hamilton family through your childhood years?
I won't say it was tough, because I think it was normal for the time, really. Like I said, my dad was a landscape gardener, therefore we had no money. We lived in a 2-bedroom terraced house in Hertfordshire, and that was, to me it was a normal life. I didn't know any difference. I think it makes a really good grounding for you, in that there's no expectation for things. You always have to achieve. You always have to work towards something. So, if you wanted to buy something yourself, you've got to save for it. It wasn't just given, and things. So, that was great. And I had brilliant. I just really only happy memories from that time. And then my dad then came out of landscaping and bought his garden centre that he bought in Kettering, in Northamptonshire. And I was there every day after school, weekends and whatever, and that was great for me. But then, the problem with my dad was not the horticultural side. He was a superb horticulturist and could turn his hand to virtually anything. But as a businessman, he would admit to you that he was probably the worst that there could possibly be. had no real idea about business at all, and his focus was on horticulture, and that's what he loved. And so ultimately the garden centre went bust. And, that was tough to lose everything, the house and everything like that, and to go down that route. But again, you face things that are put in front of you. And I'm people sometimes get taken aback when you talk to them about the bankruptcy and all of that sort of stuff. And they worry that, you're either going to get quite emotional, which is not what they want, and quite rightly, or that it's something you don't want to talk about. But of course, for me and for my dad, it was the best thing that ever happened to him, because without that, he would have never gone down the journalistic route, and therefore people would never have experienced what they experienced from him, from the stuff that he was writing for the magazines, when he was editing Practical Gardening magazine. And obviously all those 17 years on Gardeners World potentially would never have happened if the garden centre had been successful.
Interesting.
Very, like you say, it sounds like you've had a very interesting sort of bringing up, and it's kept you very grounded, which, like you say, I'm sure has helped in different parts of your life. And I guess part of that is sort of making the best of what you have. It's a phrase that appears very early on in the story that Chris is talking about the right genes. That it's a brilliant book. But did that mantra help you sort of in your own career path?
I think to be fair, when I look back now at everything I've just said to you now, and that sort of way of life, and you link that with horticulture, I'm talking to people who know here that is the perfect grounding for going into horticulture. Horticulture's tough. It's not easy. It's tough. We work in an industry that's not cash rich. It's a difficult one in that respect to having a garden that we have here that's open. So it's incredibly difficult to keep that going because of the impact of the weather, something you have no control over, no matter how good you do things. But also the fact that we work in all weather conditions and things don't go as according to plan all the time, and and all this sort of stuff. So you're making the best of what you've got is something that I've been doing really since day one. And so for horticulture, that's the perfect training, as it were, inadvertently, but it turns out to be the perfect training for what I've done. And you just have to, whatever happens to you, you just have to learn to pick yourself up, dust yourself down, and crack on. And and that's the way that you deal with life. I think the great thing about my dad was the positivity all the time, and I think that came across in the on the TV and in his writing, that whether it's in the books or the magazine articles that he wrote, he was so positive about horticulture and how great it was for you, and the fact that if something went wrong, I was being brought up with if it doesn't work the first time, then try again. And that's something that there comes a point where you have to say, well, hang on a minute, I've tried enough now and it's still not working. So perhaps I need to look at what I'm doing as opposed to the fact that something else is causing it. But that's the sort of the way that we go on, and the positivity. And I think in horticulture, because of we deal with living things all the time, you have to be of a positive mindset, or else you'd be a gibbering wreck sat in the corner if you took personally every single negative thing that happened in your work life.
That's definitely good. I mean, certainly thinking about my bulbs this year that we've been laughing about all year. I still haven't got my bluebells in some of my pots coming up.
and now it's nearly June.
I did. I ran a vegetable year-round day course. Of course, it's a day thing that on just the other day, and I was, I'm talking to people there and saying to them, at the end of the day, the trouble with amateur gardeners is the fact that if something goes wrong, the first thing they say is, I don't know what I did wrong there. And I would say that probably 90% or even 90% plus of the time, it's not their fault. It's actually something else that's caused that. And sometimes if you're not positive enough, you give up then. Whereas you shouldn't, because actually you don't see that it's not your fault, but it probably is. So, and with veg, it's always the case that every year something will outperform or some things will outperform what you're expecting, and you're desperately trying to make new friends, so you've got opportunity to give away what you've got too much of. But also on the other side of that coin, there's always going to be stuff that you're expecting to do well because it's done well every year, that suddenly for no, generally climatic reasons, this year it's an absolute disaster. But you can't, you have to always, I hear a lot and I say a lot, here, there's always next year. There is always next year, and that's the beauty of it, isn't there? And so that's the positivity that runs through the whole thing.
Yeah, I quite agree, Nick. I have to say, I did smile when I read that you'd gone to the same horticultural college as your dad. Was college life a good experience for you?
Oh, I still smile about it now. When just before I left for college, my dad said to me, very wisely, he was a very wise, very clever bloke, and he said to me, look, just remember that, college is your last real blowout. After you finish college and you start your first real proper job, that's real life kicks in there. So this is your last go. But, and it is a big but, always remember, there is work to be done.
Yeah.
So, it was a balance between the two, and I've made lifelong friends at college, and and had such a great time. And I would, horticulturists are great, and even when they're young, they're great. And I would advise that to anybody who has the opportunity to go to horticultural college, just do it. It's such a great time.
Yeah, and I suppose we better give a shout out to the college. That was Rutland Horticultural College in Essex.
It was Rutland College in Essex. Yeah, it was great, and so as we still have contacts there. Obviously when we had the Geoff Hamilton New Gardeners Foundation was set up to initially to fund students going through Rutland that couldn't otherwise afford to do it. Unfortunately, the charity has now come to its natural end, in that respect. But we've had links with Rutland right the way through, and a great place it was. I was fortunate for me that most of virtually all the lecturers, there was one lecturer there, a chap called Ian Lambert, who taught glasshouse crops, who also taught my dad. And then one lecturer there who's head of horticulture when I went, Lance Anderson, who actually was in his first year of lecturing when my dad was in his last year of college. Although he never lectured my dad, he never taught my dad, but he was there when he was there. Fortunately, nobody else remembered him, which for me was a bonus. Because he was I might have been bad enough when I was at college, but he was a nightmare. The stories that he used to come out with, and then he told me to behave, and I'm thinking, oh my God, you told me all these things, and but he had probably a better time than I had at college.
Great stuff.
Fantastic. Now, Barnsdale Gardens, I hadn't realised until as we started researching this that it sort of evolved. It started in one site and then moved to a second site. Can you tell us the story of Barnsdale the Gardens?
Yeah. When my dad was first asked to go on a guest on Gardener's World, he was the editor of Practical Gardening magazine at the time. So what Gardener's World used to do was just invite, on the rare occasion, what they class as a gardening expert onto the programme to help whichever presenter or presenters with a task they were doing. So they'd just like to bring in, different people from time to time to do different things. And obviously, being the editor of the top magazine of its day, he was regarded as a gardening expert. Now, the magazine was based in offices in Peterborough. Yep. He didn't want to live in a city. He was a country boy, being brought up in Hertfordshire. Although he was actually a proper Cockney. He was born, in the East End of London, but they moved out when he was 2, and so he found this place to rent in Rutland, which is a mile down the road from the site we're at now, and it was a cottage that he had, and he was able to rent 2 acres of land behind that, and what he did was he used the front garden of the cottage for his ornamental pictures for the magazine. And then developed the bit behind, the 2 acres behind, for fruit and veg, again for pictures for the magazine. Now, when John Kenyon, who was the producer that was unquestionably my dad's best producer, he was the one that asked my dad to guest on the programme, saw budding talent there, and realised that he was going to be something special. Asked him back very quickly to guest again, and then he started to appear irregularly on the programme in 1979. And then they started to come to Barnsdale to do stuff. But of course, it was already set up, almost to have those stills put together as a film, as it were, if you know what I mean. And so it was set up in ideally for the television. But then the family that owned Barnsdale Hall, which was the main hall and on the area, the site that my dad rented his cottage from, that family, they decided to sell up. And obviously he only rented, so he had to find somewhere else to move to. And the house at the top of the garden came up for sale with 5.5 acres of land, 4 acres of which he could turn into garden.
Yeah.
So he moved in 1983, and basically the garden space was just pasture then. So he had it ploughed and then started to create these sort of television sets, I suppose, within that area. So that's the reason that we had 2 sites originally. I mean, he would have been quite happy staying where he was, but obviously, he had no option in that respect.
I see. And did you get involved with the gardens at all?
I was in 1979. I was doing my pre-entry year before I went to college, and then I went to college, and so I was sort of away from the area, as it were, and then went off to work in Norfolk. But I used to, every time I came back home to visit, it was a terror, really. I look back at the amount of work that I did for free.
Oh, of course,
now,
it's always for free, isn't it, for your parents?
Yeah. Well, you say that. I mean, you say that. I've got 2 boys, and
Oh, you have to pay them.
They're in their 30s now. You have to pay them to get out of bed now. I mean, neither of them are living at home now. But the point is, it's sort of, it's that stage where they'll do something as long as they're much more, switched on to those sort of things these days. So,
yeah.
I used to come back and help him, holidays from college and stuff like that, and weekends when I used to come home, there was always something to do. I got involved, but but I didn't. I actually came back here full time in February 1989.
Okay.
So that's when I came back to work with my dad.
Is that when he started paying you?
Well, sort of. Yeah, sort of. I mean, originally I sort of imposed myself on him, as children do. And then I found somewhere to rent in Oakham, and he basically paid me enough to pay my rent, run my car, and buy my food, and that was it. And then I was to be honest, I was quite happy with that, because my life even then was horticulture. I was quite happy to be involved in that, and I think from my upbringing has helped in that you get used to living on a low income, and that's something I think that like I said, horticulture is a life choice, not a job in that respect. So it's all intertwined. So I was quite happy with that, but he was a bit of a devil when I look back like that.
Nick, a couple of months ago, I had the pleasure, obviously, of visiting Barnsdale, and you very kindly took a guided tour of a group of garden media members around your nursery and around the gardens. And the revelation that you started the tour actually in the nursery, and the revelation that Barnsdale has always been organic was something I hadn't fully realised, and peat-free too.
Yeah, I think. I mean, we're not. I have to say, we're not 100% organic in the nursery. We don't use a peat-free organic compost, and we do use peat-free compost for everything we grow. But I do use artificial fertiliser in the compost. I don't spray any chemicals in the nursery, and in that respect, I use organic methods in order to control pest and disease. But primarily, most of that is hygiene, and being vigilant and catching things at day one. I'm a very keen advocate of the finger and thumb method when it comes to green fly.
Yep.
So, if you catch them early enough before they start laying in the gardens. My dad, when he first moved here, wasn't organic, but within the first 3 years, he was doing his organic trials and then became organic completely. So we have been organic here for, approximately 36, 37 years. In the gardens, and then completely peat-free for about 32 years now, on the whole site, and that's something that that we're we're more than happy to tell people and to talk to people about. We don't lecture anybody about anything. If people want to ask us questions and talk to us about it, then we will. We're not, we don't pressure people into turning them that way because we think it's the right way to go. But we're always happy to encourage and to to educate people on the methods that we use.
That's interesting. So the nursery stock that you're growing, does that you're growing all of that with peat-free mediums? Are you able to sort of share with us any of the sources of your potting materials? Just so, I mean, here at the garden centre we sell various different peat-free mediums. Are there any ones that you found are really good?
I think the it's a problematic area, isn't it? The peat-free thing has been for a long time. I mean, I originally, we started off using a coir mix here, and in actual fact, when Sinclair Horticulture first developed their New Horizon compost for the amateur gardener, that was based on what we were doing here. And I spoke a lot with Sinclair and things like that, and we they sort of developed the mix based on that, as my dad did in the garden on what I was doing on the nursery, and so that was interesting in that respect. But I think the problem has been that horticulture has been very slow to take up this peat-free thing. We've as an industry, I talk with the royal we as an industry. I don't talk about us because we've been doing it for 32 odd years. The peat-free thing, but as an industry, we've buried our head in the sand and just pretending that this thing wasn't coming and it was all going to go away and we were going to be happy doing what we were doing. But there comes a time when you've just got to bite the bullet and say, we need to embrace this and we need to do it. And we've been very slow to do that. And just like a parent dealing with a petulant child, the government has said, right, you've had your time, hang on a minute, bang, we're now going to do it. And you've got to do it. So by next year sometime, people are going to stop being able to buy amateur gardeners buy peat-based compost. And that, the problem is that you suddenly get to a stage where people don't have the chance to try all the various different brands that are out there to see which one suits them. You must find at the garden centre that people come in, they have the favourite tools that they like, all the others are rubbish. The next person who walks through the door will use one of the ones that first person thought was rubbish and think the ones that they buy are rubbish. And the same with seeds and compost and everything. We all have our favourite things, and also the things that for some obscure reason seem to work well with us and other things don't. So you need to find your compost that will work. And I think the same with the horticulture industry. We now are staring. Well, the horticulture industry is staring down the barrel, and it's going to be difficult. And I think that there potentially have got to be some sort of exception to some of the. It's difficult, I think, at the moment with peat-free to accommodate certain sectors of types of plants. So, things like the rhododendrons and azaleas, the acidic things are still quite difficult, I think, in a peat-free mix because there isn't anything specifically at the moment for that. Some of the houseplant stuff is also quite difficult, and things. But I use, as my mix, I use a commercial mix, obviously, here in the nursery, which is produced by Melcourt. But I do use the Melcourt amateur compost for the propagation compost here, which is the same as people get there. In the gardens at the moment, we are using New Horizon. We've sort of gone back to that at the moment to do that, but we're still looking at other things, and just trying. We're always. I think we don't want to be in a situation where we just stick with one thing all the time. I mean, we will use what's best for us, but we'll also, because we're in the business of educating people, we need to be able to talk to people and say, yes, we tried that compost and we found this, and we tried that compost and we found that. And so we're always looking to try different ones. So we continually play about, really.
Yeah, I think that's it, and like you say, we're a massively changing sort of sector at the moment, and what works for you might not work for me. But equally, if we've tried both options, and you've got one that works, and I've got one that works, well, it's happy days, isn't it? And I guess the other question I've got with regards to sort of peat-free and sort of being ecologically minded is, have you noticed over the years sort of any benefits to the local wildlife and the local ecosystems around Barnsdale that you think you can attribute to the fact that you've been essentially organic all these last 30 odd years?
Yeah, I think being obviously not city or centre of town based is helpful, because obviously we're out in the countryside, less pollution here, which helps. But I can't tell you how many times a day we get told by people, you've got such a lot of birds, you've got such a lot of butterflies, you've got such a lot of this, you've got such a lot of that, and it is absolutely 100% attributed to the way that we treat our garden, and that's from the organic approach that we have. So I think that we get asked an awful lot as to every year, an awful lot all through the year, as to why our hostas look so good. What do we do? And I always say to people, do you really, really want me to tell you our secret method? And they're so keen, and they're very excited. They always say, oh, yes, please tell us what your secret method is. And I always say to them, the thing is that we don't do anything. All we do is we approach our garden organically. So, we have the birds, we have the ground beetles, we have the frogs and toads and all those hedgehogs and all those things that eat that sort of pest. The point is that you have to readjust your mindset so that you're able to cope with the little bit of damage you get, in order to have the predator, which are all these things that we want in our gardens. They're all predators, the hoverflies, the butterflies, all of those things. They all will eat, not butterflies, but ladybirds and stuff like that. They'll all eat pests, so they're a predator, or the larvae will. They're a predator, and the birds, obviously hedgehogs and all that, are a predator. And so in order to have those, we do need something for them to feed off. And that's the pest. So, and some years they'll be worse than others. And I've always said to people, to be organic, you sort of need to be partially sighted, because there are times, there are years and times in the year when you really don't want to be able to see things. That's what I mean by the partially sighted. So if something isn't looking great because it's been attacked by greenfly, then don't look at it.
Well, that's it. Ignore it.
That's my point. Okay, you might need to spray it with your washing up liquid or whatever, but the point is that other times, don't depress yourself by looking at it and thinking, oh God, look at it, it's got bits deformed or whatever. Look at other things that look great. That's what the garden's about. It's about uplifting. Don't bring yourself down by looking at stuff that hasn't worked quite right, because again, what control have you got over that? You can spray it once it's happened and things, but that's very much where the being vigilant thing that I was talking about earlier on with the nursery. Always, if you follow John around, my head gardener John, if you follow him around, then he's always looking. I mean, he's a nosy devil anyway, but he's always looking, and he's looking for things that catch his eye. Because you need to catch them, like I said, in the early stages. If you catch pests, certainly, and disease in the early stages, you can eliminate it without it becoming a problem. It's when you miss it, it then becomes a big problem, or potentially.
Yeah, good old prevention is better than cure, though, as they say. Nick, you've got obviously 38 amazing gardens. When I was looking around the other month over at Barnsdale, obviously all, as you say, sort of TV gardens, as that was the original concept, wasn't it? And you keep these open to the public. Do you ever change the themes of the gardens, or are they kept to very much the same sort of blueprint, what they were designed for back in the day?
Yeah, no, I mean, if my dad came back today, there would be things obviously recognise the whole layout, because we're landlocked, so we can't expand, as it were. We have to, if we want to change something, what we have to do is take the insides of a garden space out and redevelop that. And so he would come and there would be an awful lot that he doesn't recognise. And I think as gardeners generally, amateur and professional, you need to, in order to keep your interest, you need to keep dribbling through change. And very often, subconsciously, a lot of the time, sometimes consciously, when you get to the stage where you're coming towards the end of your vision that you had for your garden space, you then decide to change one plant. And what that does is then has a knock-on effect with everything else, and you start the process again. Because if you're interested in gardening, what you want to be doing is gardening. So you don't want something that's finished that gives you very little scope to go out and do stuff. So for us here, we've got a double-edged sword, really, in that, to keep myself and the gardeners interested and keen and wanting to do, to be out there in the garden, we also need to dribble through change. It's not a historical garden. So it's not set in stone. It doesn't not change. A garden is a work in progress, and that's the way we look at it. But obviously on the other side of that, the other edge of that is the fact that, in order to get people coming back, we need to keep changing things, and that's what we do. So we dribble through change, not rapidly, but as a gradual process.
Oh, brilliant. That's a really good way of looking at things, isn't it? Because, like you say, it's not a historical sort of garden, which obviously these days a lot of the National Trust gardens are sort of laying out their historical images and paintings and what have you, and saying, right, we're recreating that, and that's what it will now look like for the next, I don't know how many years, but I think at the end of the day, plants grow, and I think gardens should grow,
evolve as well. It's all about evolution, isn't it? Yeah.
But I do think there's space for everything. Is the point. If you went to Hampton Court Palace as what I use as a prime example to people, you wouldn't expect a 21st century garden to be around. You expect a Tudor garden because that's the historical icon that it is. And the same with a lot of the National Trust properties. It has to tie in with the house that it's with. But I think for the majority of us at home, as we grow older and our tastes change, or we get inspired by different things, then we want to do that with our garden as well. So it's a really good way to do it.
Nick, on the front and the back of your book, The Right Genes, there's yourself and Geoff on a bike. Now, obviously, you obviously like your cycling. Have you ever been inspired to include cycling or bikes within a garden design?
That's a good point, actually. That potentially, when I put the phone down on you later on this morning, that's going to be something that is going to race around in my mind. No, I haven't. But now you've put it there. What an idea!
Nice one. We might have inspired a new garden in the future. Cool, good stuff. And have you observed, obviously working in our industry for as long as you have, how sort of the fashions come and go and change in gardening? I'm thinking sort of 10, 15, 20 years ago, it was all landscape fabric, purple slate, and odd sort of plants, architectural sort of features for plants if you wanted a low maintenance garden, whereas now it's more astroturf and plastic flowers and plants, may I even say. I mean, have you noticed sort of that, and what do you think the benefits and changes that have come that are good as time's progressed?
I think that as I said just now, that there's a place for everything, and I understand that that there's a place for astroturf, but, and it is a big but, I think that should be restricted to people who absolutely need it. So people who can't, for whatever reason, maybe due to a disability or due to age or whatever, cannot mow their grass, because at the end of the day, the thing is that gardening is about the doing. It's about the doing. If at the end of the day you can stand in your garden and look round and think, I've done a blooming good job here, really, really like this. Doesn't matter what anybody else thinks about it. Really doesn't matter. It's not their garden. It's your garden. And if you can stand in there and think you've done a really good job, but at the end of the day, if you're interested in gardening, as I said before, you want to be able to get out there and do something. So, making a garden, and for quite a number of years now, it's driven me nuts. This idea of not making your garden so that you don't actually have to do anything. And you're thinking, well, I can understand, there are, and I say, there is a space for that for a small amount of people who live their whole life, who have no interest in gardening whatsoever, but have a garden and they've got to do something with it. Then I understand that. But for the majority of us, we need to find that happy balance whereby, gardening doesn't become a chore. It's always a pleasure. And and we can go out there and do so. So it's in the doing. So I'm not a great fan of plastic flowers, and I'm not a great fan of astroturf. Just purely for the sake of then eliminating the mowing. It's about the doing. Gardening, and I think that yes, so-called fashions in gardening change, but the basic principles there will always stay the same. And I think that. A lot of the time when I run the courses that I do here, I always say to people, what I do is I don't tell you what to go home and do. What we do is we arm you with the information that you need to then go home and make your own decisions, rationalize things yourself because you understand all the basics and you're able to put together. Because John here does the rose pruning courses that we do. So if he shows somebody a group of people how to prune a particular rose, then to make that as it should be, then they go home and look at their rose bush and think, oh God, it doesn't look anything like the rose he's just pruned. What do I do? So it's about giving people the information, the inspiration, and whatever to be out there doing stuff. And I think that's the most important thing, whether it's using decking or whether it's doing whatever they are doing. It is, it's about encouraging, making sure that people are still encouraged to go out in their garden and do stuff.
And I think also a little bit of artificial grass and plastic flowers might look good, but it doesn't reward you in the long term, does it? I mean, there is nothing better than, I think, say, growing a courgette and getting something fruit sort of to put in the frying pan halfway through the year. It's fantastic. Or the raspberries that you grow that one year give you a great crop and then another year the birds have eaten them all. But
but that's the point, isn't it? But also the thing is, it's about thinking out of the box. So all the environmental and ecological things are a big thing now. And I have I hear we leave just small areas. We can't leave too many because we don't have the ability to explain everything to everybody, and people are very quick to jump to conclusions if an area looks what they class as tatty, but there are. We need to think about the knock-on effect that we have with insects. If you're using plastic flowers, you've got nothing for insects there at all, have you? No. Grass as well is a great source can be for beneficial insects and things like that. So, we do need to be thinking outside the box as well. And like I say, we are the curator of our space, but our space has an impact not just on ourselves, but on the wider community as well. So we need to think about that as well.
Yes, Nick, I quite agree. And actually, on the basis of all your gardens, they have to look good for all your visitors. How does your team? And if I remember rightly, when I visited, you haven't got a huge gardening team at Barnsdale. How do you keep it all looking so good and pristine?
I have. John, my head gardener, has been with me for 20. It'll be coming up for 28 years now. He came as a 17-year-old, and as a 17-year-old YT in the days of a youth training scheme, and he's been, he looks after the team out there. He's got 5 people that help him, and full time. And you're right, they do a magnificent job. The one benefit we have is that we have never been and will never be a stately home type garden. So, it's not about being pristine. It's about being relative to what people have at home. So, there are 4 things I look at when people visit the gardens. One is that obviously we want them to enjoy themselves. The other one is that everything we do is relative. So the garden sizes, as you know, because when you walk round, the garden sizes are average, for what people are likely to have. Indeed. The third thing is that everything's achievable. And the last thing is that we want everybody to go away with at least one idea. So, we look at all of those things. So the thing is that we're maintaining the garden to be like your own back garden. So, we're all very busy these days. We don't have 23.5 hours a day to be outside manicuring our gardens anymore. It's not like it used to be in the 50s, 60s and 70s in that respect. That's the good thing. I did, a few years ago, I muted the idea of miners' lamps for them so they could work at night as well. That didn't go down well.
I suspect not. No, I wonder why.
But they as everybody does here, we all love coming here every day, and we all get on really well. For me, I can teach as John can, and whatever, anybody to do anything. That we don't need experienced people. If we take somebody on, we've taken total novices on in the past, and we can train them to do whatever we want. But my main focus is finding the right people. So that's the right sort of people to create a magnificent team. If you've got a magnificent team, and I mean that as a whole, not just the garden team, but everybody, then everybody works in the same direction with the same ethos, and we all, want to produce the best that we can. Aim with that aim that we're aiming for. So the best we can isn't being absolutely pristine. The aim is to inspire people because it looks like the sort of thing that they've got at home. We hope more professional, maybe, than a lot, but we hope that they can see things that, because it's inspirational when you see something that you can then imagine in your own garden. But I get people coming in and saying, I walked round and I saw 3 weeds. I was so pleased. Because that's what they have at home. Yeah. And the point is, even weeding is a job that needs to be continually done. So it's something that gets you out into your garden. And we've known for centuries, horticulturists have known for centuries the benefits, the mental health benefits of the garden. It's just suddenly become a thing that doctors are prescribing to people, and things we've known for centuries about it, and we're such a happy bunch in horticulture. Nobody's ever clocked onto it before, so it's a great, it's great to be able to do that for people, and like I say, everybody here, when you come across staff, they're all happy to talk to people. Some of them are a bit too keen to talk to people, but we have to do it.
I think you're very right in the sense that we are very fortunate to be. Well, I love working at the garden centre because you get out and you're not stuck behind the desk all day long. You can get out in the fresh air and get a bit of sunshine on you every now and again. And but yeah, you're right. It's one of those inspirational sort of careers that it leaves you feeling happy at the end of the day, and it's like you've achieved something sometimes. But unless obviously whatever you're growing's gone totally wrong. But your nursery is a great sort of draw for the visitors that you have to the gardens, isn't it? And I guess, can you think of sort of any things that have changed through the years with regards to what you're selling now to what you were selling maybe 20 years ago? And
I think people, yes, I think there's certainly because of the lack of time that people have, or let's say they give more time to other things. So when I'm touch wood, I'm pleased at the moment that I don't have grandchildren at the moment. I'm happy with that. But we never signed up when we had children. We never signed up to the grandparent duty, which suddenly comes. So that all adds to the things that people have to do. So when you look at going back, maybe 30 years ago, how and it is still big, but how much bigger bedding was, and now people have moved maybe more to perennial plants because they can, if they select the right things, they can still get a really good long flowering period. But obviously, there's much less work intensity with that, and and so it's like I say, with all these new things that are coming in, like the grandparents' duty and other things that we're doing, it's giving us the ability to still do our gardening, but maybe not have to worry about finding the time to do things. So I think the rise in perennial plants has been a big thing, I think, in the last sort of 20-30 years.
Definitely. Nick, on your nursery, obviously you're growing plants for your sort of seasonal bedding displays, and obviously your amazing vegetable garden you have at Barnsdale. Have you any tips on sort of raising plants for the flower garden and the veg garden you could share with our Dig It listeners?
Yeah, I think research is the big thing.
Mm-hmm.
Make sure that you're getting the right plants, the right vegetables for the right spaces, in places, is always a good thing. The one thing I do find, is that a lot of the time I'm always making notes. People don't make notes about things, and it sometimes it's handy to have things to look back on. Whenever I sow seed or take cuttings, I always write the date on the back of the label, purely because if I remember that these didn't do well last time I did them, and this batch comes through, and I think, oh gosh, they've done well. When did I sow those, or when did I take those as cuttings? And then you've got, you might never use it. It takes 2 seconds to write on the back of a label, but the point is it's there if you need it. So. And I have a book where I just jot down different things, and it does help massively, I think, with that, because plants can be, can be very fickle. From seed, from cuttings, from even just buying them and planting them in the garden. It's something that you don't. It can become a very expensive exercise if you do it randomly. Having the knowledge is important, and I think research is a great thing. And there's no better research than verbal. You go to places like your garden centre, you come to nurseries, you go to all these things, places. Knowledgeable people are there. Ask them questions, ask them about things, rather than just buying stuff that you like, because it might not suit. And so that's important, I think.
Definitely. And Chris and I talked before about when we're down the allotment, or sort of talking to your neighbours over the garden fence, and something's growing well in their garden. You ask them what variety it is, or you give someone one of your bits of rhubarb, and it's a really nice one. And I think it's a great thing that you can share sort of information. Like you say, sort of asking questions is the key to that, isn't it? And
yeah, absolutely.
I noticed that. Going through your website, you talked earlier about the fact your brother's a photographer, and some of the images on the website are beautiful. Really inspiring. And I had absolutely no idea that Barnsdale had still existed and had carried on. Forgive me for my ignorance, but obviously researching this show, I found out that you are still there, and you've still got all of the things and what you've done since. The Gardener's World's no longer filming there, but the reclaimed garden image on the website looks like you've got some old beehives. Is that something that you've got up at Barnsdale, or are they just repurposed old WBC hives that are now compost bins? What have you done with them? Where did they come from?
Right. Well, the beehives that we have in the reclaimed garden are homemade. Made those ourselves. They're made from the design that's in my dad's cottage garden book that he did, the series of cottage garden series of 6 programs. I think that was broadcast 94, 95 through the winter time there. And so they're homemade, and they come apart and really great compost bins, and because they look, this is the point. They look like a beehive. They look effective, and so you'll put them in a place where they get the sun, they get the heat, which helps with the rotting down process, the speed of it, and everything else, rather than sticking it in the shadiest, coldest part of your garden out the way where you don't see it, because it's a compost bin made of pallets, and things which are great, but obviously, you don't necessarily want to be sat on your patio or on your lawn or whatever, looking at a pile of pallets, as it were. So whereas that sort of compost bin you can use, we do have proper bona fide recycled beehives. One in the gentleman's cottage garden, there is one there, but we don't. It's not used for anything. It's just used as an ornamental thing, really. I did a little bit of apiary when I was at college, just the basics, many years ago now, and I would love to keep bees. The problem I find is that far too many. In order to do that, I would need to section off quite a large space, and I don't have that. And if I had a large space, I would just want to create gardens in it. So that sort of thing. But also, lots of people, I think, don't. They're terrified of things that buzz around that look waspish, and don't really understand that bees are not out to sting you. To be fair, wasps through most of the year aren't out to sting you. only late on in the summer that they go a bit mad. But they're terrified of things that buzz around, so it wouldn't really be suitable to have. We do have the local Rutland beekeepers who have their hives in land around us. So in actual fact,
yep.
they are stealing our blooming nectar for
But you've got to you should be. I'm sure you maybe already know, but there's a bunch up near Rutland who are breeding black bees, which are the native bees. So it might be that you've got native bees feeding on your flowers and helping propagate.
Very likely. Yeah,
it is a good thing.
Yeah.
Nick, in your knotty garden, I think you've had issues with box blight, haven't we all? And obviously it required some replanting. Are you trying any new sort of box plant alternatives at Barnsdale?
We found that we've become a little bit too reliant on box because it grows well on our ground and there's low hedging and stuff. We've got quite a lot of different sort of heights of hedging and things. And then we've got the box blight, and it does make you then sort of stand back and look and think, right, okay, what else can I use? So we are trying lots of different things. And you will have seen, Chris, in the knot garden now that we've got, actually we're using a dwarf white lavender, Lavandula, augustifolia, Arctic Snow, and as a white one, and that's obviously evergreen, and that's now knotted with Berberis Thunbergii atrapurpurea. So that's a dwarf purple leaf Berberis, which is deciduous. So you get the variation of evergreen and deciduous in the winter, but also you get the variation of the grey-green foliage and the purple foliage of the box, and also the white flowers of the lavender blend well with that. So it's actually working way, way, way better than I ever thought it would. But we are trying lots of different things, and that's really, actually it was a really great thing in a way. So I've turned the depression of getting box blight, and it is we've still got box in the garden. It is gradually working its way through everything, but it's been we first found it in 1996, so it's been a slow progress. But it gives us now the opportunity, it's exciting opportunity to find different things. So we are trying lots of different things. Yeah,
well, certainly our customers are in the same predicament at the garden centre here. So things like Euonymus, green Spire, Jean Hugues, and obviously some of the rosemaries now are coming back into the fore. So it's all good news that there's plenty of plant material to replace the box. That's for sure.
Yeah.
And Nick, are you like the local plumber whose tap is always dripping, and your garden is possibly not quite as beautiful as the ones that you work with every day? Or tell us a little bit about your garden.
Oh, I feel hurt. and now I'm going to have to tell you. I do spend 23 and a half hours a day here every day. I work 7 days a week and I love it. And so my garden at home is grass, basically. My front garden, actually, I still haven't mowed my front garden. It's had snowdrops in it. It's got bluebells in it at the moment in the grass. It's got had Primula veris cowslip in there, and that's now I'm just leaving that now to seed. And once the bluebells are finished and the Primula's seeded, then I'll mow it. But I have another area of grass at the front which I leave all year, and I just trim it in the autumn, and a clover in there and all sorts of various other things. The grass at the back I just mow. So I have it, if ever I do get the chance to sit outside with a glass of wine or a cold beer or something, then I'll that's what I use it for. But it needs to be easy because I have I'm just here all the time, so I don't, as much as I'd like to have that, when I'm mowing at home, I'm thinking about what I should be doing here.
Isn't that the case though? It's like low maintenance gardens at home.
Nothing wrong with that.
I said, Chris is a little bit more dedicated than I am, and has a wonderful garden with lots of
tries.
I have a large lawn with a few dandelions in it, and that's
nothing wrong with that. Yes, nothing wrong with that. Nick, obviously you produce quite a bit of compost at Barnsdale. What's the options of producing that? Do you use like the tumbler types, or do you use just the traditional sort of compost bins? What is any preferences?
Yeah, we have a tumbler that we have out to show people. We don't actually use it. It's a bit small for what we produce, really. So we do put stuff in it, and we do have it out for people to see. But we tend to make our own. We for our leaves, we compost our leaves separately. So we're predominantly, because of the, as you know, when you drove up here, the avenue that you drive along is predominantly beech.
Yes.
And we suffer from a prevailing westerly here, which blows across the garden towards the avenue of trees. So they're sort of 100 feet beech trees, and 100-foot high beech trees. And so it blows them sort of roadside. As soon as the leaves are ready to drop, the wind swings around and blooming well blows from the east and blows all the leaves in the garden. So, of course, when we mow them up, because it helps to chop them up and start that, it speeds up the rotting process. But a lot of the leaves we have are quite tough. So they go in a separate bin, which is basically just rabbit wire, round 4 stakes. And we do that because it's in there for 3 years. Whereas with the compost, it's much more important for us in order to knock that round as quickly as we can. So we very often we mostly use wood. Although it deteriorates, it's a really good insulator and easy to make your own. And like I said before, we're trying to encourage people to do a lot of stuff themselves. So that's what we do.
Excellent. Nick, you've written a couple of books, Organic Gardening and Organic Gardening Fruit and Veg. Do you have any other books in the pipeline? And do we get a sequel to The Right Genes, as it ends on a bit of a cliffhanger?
Yeah, that was the point.
I thought it might be.
The trouble is, I thought what I'll do is I'll sort of stop it as soon as it finishes. Really when my dad first appears on Garden as well. There's a classic thing is they always leave people wanting more. The trouble is that you're one of a long line of people that have been harassing me when when's the next one, when's the sequel coming out, when's the next book coming out, when does the story carry on and whatever. I'm 72,500 words into that one. I've just started my first edit read through of it. Obviously now, as things get busy here, the time that I get to do that becomes less. That is the next book I've got. I'm not, that's my focus at the moment, is to get that one done. That is also going to be called The Right Genes, but genes spelt Jeans. So that my dad was the first gardener to garden in genes. So I just thought, when I thought about writing the books, that it was a good tie-in in that respect. So that's well on the go. I can't tell you when it's going to be out because it just depends on. I keep trying to do little bits every time I get a few minutes and whatever. But it's on the way. It is on the way.
I'm really looking forward to it. So yes,
yeah, good,
excellent. Now, it's a big year for Barnsdale. It's your 40th anniversary, and I know you're creating something rather special at this month's Gardeners World Live show. Can you tell us anything about this, or tease of what we might like to, or what we might expect to see?
Well, I'd be quite like somebody to tell me what I'm going to be doing, really, because we're in that situation where it's a strange thing. I don't think that the vast majority of the general public actually realise the process you go through when you create a display at a show, whether it's a show garden outside, which I think is much more sort of set in stone, as it were, and easier in that respect. When you're in the floral marquee, it is more difficult. You're looking at things at absolute perfection all the time. So, at the moment, a lot of my plants are travel sick because they're going in and out of tunnels. You take them out, they slow down too much, you put them back in again, and then yes. Trying to gauge. I've just put some against the north facing wall of my shed, which is cold and colder, obviously there and shaded, just to try and slow them down a bit. I don't have any other means to do that. So all I can tell you is that I have a pathway that's really just the number 40 that's all joined as a pathway in the show there. I've got an idea of the sort of, it will be a cottage garden planting because that's what we do. And there are, I'm going to have a Spirea in there. I'm going to have obviously the Geoff Hamilton rose in there and some other varieties of roses in there. Some herbaceous potentillas will be there, and stuff like that. So I'm hoping to have Lychnis Gardener's World in flower because that's a really good link, obviously, with it being the celebration of the gardens and stuff. So, that's the sort of thing. But obviously what happens is that, I will take whatever's looking good. We get there. and then we put it together. So literally, I've got an idea of what I want to do and where I want certain things to be. But when you start putting it together, then that can change, and all of a sudden, that plant that you've tended for months and is looking fantastic just doesn't fit in, and it's impossible to get it in there. And sadly, you have to take it away again. So, it is something that will create, but I can guarantee that the pathway will be there and that it will be in a cottage garden style. So it'll be all about the flowers, all not crammed in there, but all looking great. And hopefully you won't see much bark underneath. What you'll see is just plants and plants and plants and plants.
It sounds excellent. I'm looking forward to seeing that at Gardeners World Live. And will you be doing any book signing at the show at all, Nick?
Yeah, I'm having a chat with David Hurrian on the stage in the marquee on the Saturday. Not sure exactly what time that's going to be yet, but and I'm also doing a book signing on the Saturday after that as well. When I'm there, I will have the book for sale there, but I'll be doing the book signing on the Saturday. John, the head gardener, John, is there every day. I go there and crate, and then have to come back and rest.
Tiring work of the shows, aren't they?
Yeah. Well, I also have this to look after. So when John's been with me for so long. He's sort of my right hand man. If I send him there, it's difficult then to make sure that I'm able to make sure this runs smoothly here as well. So we sort of separate ourselves like that in that respect.
Good stuff. Well, Nick, we always like to ask a question coming towards the end of the show about if you're ever stranded on a desert island, what plant or gardening implement would you take with you and why?
Okay, so I would take with me as a plant a penstemon. I have always had a fascination for penstemon. I love penstemon. I think they're such a good value plant and do really well. They're a good pollinating plant as well. So that's beneficial as well. And at one stage, I did have about 150 different varieties. I've scaled that right back now, but it got to be quite a passion actually. So that's the plant that I would take, and obviously I would have to take penstemon Geoff Hamilton. I'm in. I'd be struck down by a bolt of lightning if I didn't. But there are lots of very, very valuable and great varieties. Lots of older varieties as well that are still, what always we knew as penstemon garnet is now penstemon Andenkenine Friedrich Hahn. That is been around since the Victorian era for a good reason, because it's a blooming good plant. And there are so many of those. So lots of really good old varieties of that as well. The one gardening implement I would have to take, and this is also related to my dad, is the fact that as a young adult, I once in the garden, I once said to him, have you got a knife I can borrow? And he said to me, a good horticulturalist should never be without their knife.
Yes.
And so I would take a knife. I have a knife in my pocket wherever I go. I don't tell the people in the bank I've got a knife in my pocket when I go in, but I always have a knife in my pocket, because you just never know. It's such a versatile tool, and you never know when you might need one. The knife that's in my pocket is not one I propagate with. I have a separate knife for that. It's a general purpose knife, so it gets stuck in the ground. It gets for all sorts of different things. But a knife is definitely the tool that I would say.
Yeah, I quite agree with that. I was told, and I was instructed at college to always have a knife, and I do today. Although it's not on me today, it's actually in my bag. Nick, do you have any gardening related amusing stories or jokes you can relate to, maybe from obviously your time at Barnsdale?
Well, the one thing that I always say is that, my dad, like I said, my dad was a great horticulturalist and great, but obviously, he had to, for the majority of the time that he had Barnsdale here, he had to fund out of his own pocket to do that. So the BBC didn't really contribute anywhere near enough to run the gardens, as it were. So a lot of that came out of his own pockets. That meant that he had to do lots of other things, like the writing and the personal appearances and things like that, which took him away from his beloved garden. So therefore, a lot of the time, he employed 2 people full time to help him in the garden. And then I came back to Barnsdale, and we bought this piece of land to develop the nursery. So I was splitting sort of between the two when I was needed. But the first job that I ever did was I raked out the area where the apple arch was going to go. Mm-hmm. So you know that, Chris, when you came, that you go through the entrance. If you follow the granite pathway through, you come to a bridge, and just before that bridge, there's a couple of rather large gate posts. So our garden is sort of divided into two halves. So at that gate post there is where the sort of the piece of land that we bought in 1989. That's where that sort of finishes, and the television garden starts. So there was always a gate on there, and people didn't get to go beyond that until after my dad had passed away, and we opened that bit as part of one big garden. So what he wanted was the apple arch so that it looked sort of through that area, as it were, and back onto what was in effect a field at the time. And so I set up the apple arch, which is 15 arches, and they've got a different apple or pear up virtually every arch. So in actual fact, there are 26 different varieties of apples and pears. So we've just got 4 varieties of pear that are doubled up for pollination purposes, but lots and lots of different varieties of apples on there and pears and things. And I raked the ground level, laid the turf, didn't put grass down there, laid the turf for that, put the archways up, planted all of the apples and pears except for the last one. And then I sat back, on the Friday night when that had been filmed, and I sat back on the Friday night as I had to watch the programme. I wasn't forced to watch the programme, but every Saturday morning my dad would walk down there and he'd say to me, "So what did you think then?" That's all he'd say, and of course I had to have an answer.
Of course, you had to watch it.
So I used to watch the programme. It helps. It's like yourself, yourselves. When people see something on the programme and they're looking for certain plants, so it's important to know what they're looking for. But anyway, I sat there and watched that programme, and I'd sweated. I'd sweated blood and tears in order to get that finished in time and get it all ready and whatever so that they could film it. And blow me, I sat there and watched him leap on the television there and say, "Right, okay, so I'm just going to plant this last apple tree." And he planted the last apple tree, and he said, "Right, okay." He said, "I think I've done a really good job there." He said, "Look at how well and I just sat there open mouthed. I couldn't believe it, And the thing is that it wasn't just the once that happened. It was a few times, but of course, that's what he needed, as we all do, from time to time he needed help. But I always smile when I think back at the way that sometimes he would do that, and I know that he was laughing to himself always when he did it.
Wonderful recollections, Nick. Wonderful story.
Brilliant.
So finally, how do our Dig It listeners find out more about Barnsdale Gardens?
Well, we're on all the social media channels, obviously, and you can search for us on there. But our website, which has visitor information, times we're open, and all of that sort of stuff, and all the other links that you need is at barnsdalegardens.co.uk.
That's perfect.
Brilliant.
Well,
thank you.
Yeah, well, Nick, thank you for your time today. It's been really, really interesting, and it sort of backs up all my feelings about your wonderful legacies from your late dad and what you've achieved over the last 40 years. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much. It's been wonderful chatting to you.
It's a pleasure.
Today's show was brought to you by Buckingham Garden Centre and Nurseries. The show was hosted by Chris Day and Peter Brown. The show was produced by Peter Brown. And our thanks to Chiltern Music Therapy for providing the music. Thanks for listening.
At Chiltern Music Therapy, we want everyone to know the difference that music can make in their lives. From parents and their premature babies in hospital to grandparents with dementia. We provide music therapy and community music services to people of all ages and needs across England. We work both digitally and in person in people's homes, care homes, schools, hospitals and hospices. Find out more at chilternmusictherapy.co.uk.